right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the IoT World Manufacturing Days. Whatever corner of the world you may be logging in from, thank you for joining. I want to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, our sponsors, and our incredible team for putting this event together. Carolina, Andrea, Paul, Demi, and Greg behind, just a few people behind the scenes. This virtual event brings together a global audience to explore cutting-edge innovations in low-cost, no-code, edge, cloud computing, analytics, AI, ML in manufacturing through live panel discussions. Today's agenda includes sessions on low-code tools for shop floor decision-making, streamlined data flow, and unified namespace, harnessing the power of IoT sensors, and the potential of IoT devices using AI-powered threat intelligence to protect industrial systems. We're proud to present perspectives from the end users, analytics, analysts, consultants, solution providers, machine builders, and vendors. All sessions feature live speakers, and IoT World is committed to answer all your questions, either through today's sessions or via email or blog post. Leverage the Q&A you see here on the tool, also the hashtag IoT World Day. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, on X, and check our updated schedule for the next 10 IoT World Days. Thanks again for joining. Let's get it started with the first session, and welcome Rebecca Morgan as the moderator for this session.
Thank you, Lucian. And I just want to let the audience know this will last for 58 minutes. We will have 10 to 15 minutes for audience questions near the end. So please post your questions in the Q&A part of this tool. Chat is fine to talk in, but I will be looking for the questions under Q&A. So what we're going to do is have some conversations with the panelists. I'll introduce them briefly first, then we'll go to Q&A. Okay, let's introduce these great panelists that we have. ZJ is CEO of Flowfuse, located in the Netherlands, and it's his company that's sponsoring this first session of the first day of the 2024 IIoT World Manufacturing Days. Flowfuse is a low-code development platform bringing innovation to enterprises by leveraging Node-RED. Prior to Flowfuse, ZJ played a key role at GitLab, fostering a thriving open source community around Git. And this, my friends, is a half Iron Man. That does not mean he's like half of the actor. It means that he's run, swam, and bicycled half of a marathon, or half of an Ironman. So next we have Carlos coming in from Germany. Carlos works for Weidmuller, an over century-old family-owned business. It's a global business headquartered in Germany. Carlos is responsible for the industrial automated machine learning products. Among other awards, his development efforts have attained the German Excellence Award. He has a strong background in electrical engineering, AI, and robotics. And by looking at his background, you can see he speaks way more languages than I ever will. I'm still working on English. Our third speaker is John Dyke, who's the CEO of Sesame. John is located in Cleveland, Ohio, here in the United States. In partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy, the Clean Energy Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute, that tells you why we call it Sesame, is a nonprofit that brings in public-private investment to radically improve the efficiency of U.S. advanced manufacturing. And John is organization agnostic. He's worked with startups, he's worked with global technology companies, and now he works for a government-based not-for-profit. He's an agile man. Our fourth and final panelist is Eric, I got to remember how you said to say it, Mirandich.
Nailed it.
See, if you know about the Miranda rights, it's so much easier. Okay. And he's the chief business officer for Tulip Interfaces, located in Massachusetts, here in the United States. Eric leads product and ecosystems at Tulip, the leader in frontline operations technology. Tulip was spun out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, a leading university here in the United States. The company has over 250 enterprise customers with operations in over 20 countries. Eric is a published author, a former intelligence officer for the United States government, and has served humanitarian missions in underdeveloped countries. And lastly, me, Becky Morgan, I'm your moderator. I founded Fulcrum Consulting Works about 35 years ago. My focus is on operations strategy for closely held mid-sized manufacturing business, and that means about $100 million to $1 billion in sales, US dollars. My latest book, Manufacturing Mastery, is available through its publisher, Routledge, and as well on Amazon. So now you, the audience, knows a little bit about who we are. I want to take 3 quick polls so we can learn about you, so we can tailor our answers to your needs. Lucian, would you please post poll number 1? How are we doing on answers there, Lucian? I'm pleasantly surprised by that. That's very cool. So they may be in accounting, they may be on the shop floor, but most of you have exposure to this in a very functioning environment. Those of you getting started, we're going to answer a lot of your questions, and the no people, we're going to give you some ways to change that to a yes. Lucian, would you please post number 2 now? Okay, how are we doing on answers here? Okay, so most of you have the in-house capabilities to do that. Again, a very pleasant surprise from my perspective, because many of the manufacturers I see would be firmly in that no category. So that's very cool. And Lucian, poll number 3. Okay, how are we doing on this one? Okay, and again, I'm surprised that a third have in-house data science people. I think that is, again, fabulous. But those answers help us know where the audience is and craft our responses to what you guys are most likely to really need today. So thank you very much for doing that. Now, on any conversation, I think the way to start it is by asking why. So why do we want to do low code and no code? John, can you speak to the real complexities of any kind of manufacturing system, selection, implementation, maintenance of it, and why we need to rethink how we're developing those solutions to dramatically reduce costs and complexity?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. As you pointed out in the introduction, we have the privilege here at the Smart Manufacturing Institute of working with the brightest minds and most creative thinkers in this space to understand deeply why manufacturing productivity, why manufacturing intelligence, why manufacturing analytics is so important, and what we can do to accelerate the adoption of smart manufacturing and help U.S. manufacturers become more productive in sort of a vendor agnostic way. And as part of our process here, we've looked very, very deeply at kind of what those constraints are that are holding back manufacturers from adopting these important capabilities. And at the root of that is essentially a 3-decade-long practice of building what are stovepipe solutions and data silos. And there's an enormous cost and complexity when you're taking all of that sort of solution structure and building it from scratch every time with virtually no standardization around data structures, no standardization around data contextualization, and very few APIs that folks in the OT world can use, unlike what we've been doing for decades in the IT world. And so our fundamental premise is that we have to work. There are people, process, and technology sort of categories that we have to dramatically disrupt and drive innovation around. But around the technology side, we need low code. We urgently need low cost, low complexity solutions, which obviously fits this conversation topic well. But we also need interoperability and standardization of data structures. And that's really what we're focused on as well, to enable an ecosystem that is capable of and interested in and capable of working towards that standardization of infrastructure, the commoditization of infrastructure that will allow much more rapid and much more effective deployment of the kinds of solutions, AI, machine learning, visualization, basic analytics, which is still such an important aspect for most manufacturers as they kind of build out a more cohesive strategy for the future.
Thank you, John. ZJ, how do low-code platforms do what John just said? How do they bridge the gap between IT and business teams and operations without just creating more data inconsistencies, more duplicate applications, and more complexity?
Yeah, so part of the answer has just been given by John already. Like breaking the silos is a key aspect of this, but also by empowering all your team members, all these teams, to access and utilize this data. You were talking about a gap. Like we think we can actually level the playing field instead of bridging these gaps by providing more data access. So through Node-RED, which is an open source project, you have thousands of connections to unsilo this data and then share it with everyone. And then you get a collaborative environment for the whole team to come together and get a shared understanding of what the business problems are and how you can unlock the next step of business value.
Thanks, CJ. And I have to throw in a complaint about Excel here. Most manufacturers have some kind of ERP system that they don't know how to use or don't use well. And so we take all the data and export it and put it in Excel spreadsheets. So now we have a second source of data, and you do that and I do that. So we have 3 sources of data. So if I hear you right, I think you're saying that there's going to be only one source of data, and I don't need to use all these other sources.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's other sessions today about the UNS, which is one of the key architecture shifts that the industry is going through, which is an event-driven data architecture, which enables you to always have real-time data insight, whoever the consumer of the data is. So that is one. And then there's more and more IT systems which have a centralized view of the state of past. So we're seeing big cloud adoption where the data is already stored in these giant databases. It's more a question of who can query it and do you have the right central IT governance in place to make this data available for your whole team and across stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So Eric, can you share some examples of how these low-code, no-code tools have been successfully implemented? Because there's a lot of things that we buy and we kind of toy with, but they don't change our lives in any meaningful way. So we'd like to hear a little bit about some successful implementations and then how they make decision-making actually better.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can start by talking about, like, we've talked around it, but like why no code, low code, and then let's talk about successful and unsuccessful, and we'll try and do it pretty briefly here. The first, I think, like why no code, and Tulip is a no code frontline application platform. The fundamental premise here is that the further away from the problems you get, by definition, the more disconnected from the problems you become. the solutions you develop are more likely to be disconnected and not quite solve the problem that the people on the front line are being faced with. And so the whole idea behind no code, low code, and we really should differentiate between the two, frankly, because it's not a question of the tool. Is it low code? Is it no code? It's really more a question of the target persona. Who are you trying to enable with these tools? And if you're talking to an IT persona or somebody managing infrastructure, low code is probably more helpful than no code, to be frank. But if you're talking about people who are manufacturing engineers or on the shop floor that don't have a background in computer science and aren't comfortable even maybe writing some simple Python scripts, no code is actually quite important. The whole idea here is that you can get the tools to solve these problems in the hands of the people who are closest to the problem. And now sometimes the question gets asked, well, wait a minute, do I need to create additional headcount or resources or overhead to be able to employ these tools? But, I think you brought up a really good point earlier, which is today, what are people doing? What they're doing is they're working in Excel. They're like capturing all of this information from the grease boards, from the paper. They're putting in Excel so they can run the analysis they want to get the insight that they need. By the way, 15 people all do this in their own Excel. So to ZJ's point, on the IIoT side, unified namespace is actually a really interesting topic that I hope we can get into a little bit more in a little bit. But I'm talking about the people on the shop floor. There's so many of these different silos of spreadsheets that get emailed around version 1, 2, 3, 4. And by having all of this in a common platform and a common substrata, everyone has real-time visibility into the state of the operation. And so that's the why for no code. But to your point, successful implementations, what I want to say is that there's a way to do this successfully and a way to do this unsuccessfully. Tulip is a no-code platform. You can build anything on the platform. You could build old school monolithic applications on the platform that are complex, that nobody really understands, that are not agile in nature. And that would, sometimes people do this and we have to work with them and say, no, that was the old way to do it. There's a better way now. Really the transition is, regardless of the tool that you're using, it's this transition from monolithic backend architectures to a microservices approach to your architecture. And that's true whether you're building complex software platforms like Tulip or Google or or SAP or Salesforce. And it's also true if you're building apps on top of this platform. So rather than having sort of these densely interconnected monolithic networks of applications, the idea is pull them apart, keep them as simple as possible, and think in an agile way. So this enables decentralized development of these solutions. And by and large, that's the approach that we see most successfully employed with our customer base.
Okay, and could you give an example, like a specific in this machine shop?
Yeah.
Here's what they needed to know, and here's what they did.
Yeah, our very first customer at Tulip, it was an apparel manufacturer, and first time we were very early. The product was very, very immature. This is like almost a decade ago now. But I remember talking with the manufacturing engineer saying, "Hey, you can have better access to data," and he said to me like, "I don't have time for this." And I said, "Okay, well, what are you doing with your time?" And come to find out that every Friday, what this quality engineer did is collect all the quality forms, sit down in Excel, enter this into a spreadsheet, get the graph, send that out Friday. They would review it Monday, and it basically told them all the reasons why they failed last week. The defects were shipped, the damage was done. Maybe they can do a little better in the following week. But what we did is we built a simple application, thinking about this microservices approach, where rather than capturing all of this information on a paper-based quality form, you just enter it into an application. And now this engineer had one full day a week freed because the Friday was no longer spent entering this information into Excel. The information was already there. The visualization was already done. And so that was the first step. Then the next step is saying, wait a minute, root cause of defect, not on Friday, but on Tuesday shift, in the first shift is spiking on this one particular unique upstream root cause. And so we built a feedback loop and put a dashboard there exposing these issues to the people who are actually responsible for fixing it real time, not waiting until the next week. And in this way, enabling this agile way of working, continuously improving the operation by having availability of the real time data coming off of that operation, we were able to achieve incredible efficiency gains in just a very, very short time. So that's one example of a successful implementation.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I find that often when we're doing any kind of technology implementation, we don't have time is the big thing. And that's because we don't have time because we're busy doing it differently.
Yeah.
So, and that's a tough thing for people on the shop floor is I can't quit doing what I'm doing because people count on it, and then I
Yep.
can't do anything different or better. Okay, thank you for doing that, Eric. I appreciate that. Carlos, you're a specialist in machine learning and AI low code. Those are pretty advanced topics, but you saw from the poll that we have a lot more people that do have data scientists and a lot more people doing low code, no code than I thought we might have. So what are the shop floor application areas where you see low code or no code machine learning really make a difference? Really make a difference on the shop floor?
Sure. So I think if we look at the industry, we can recognize different application areas where it definitely makes sense to act data-driven, let's say. So summarizing, you can say that maintenance will be one of those areas where you have recurrent tasks, right? So the task is to make sure the machines are working as expected so that production can reach production goals. And so here the task is to leverage data from machines to be able to know the state of the machine, and based on that information, take decisions on when to do maintenance. So going away from a reactive or a proactive, let's say, maintenance strategy, and establishing a condition-based or predictive maintenance strategy will be one of the first application areas where we have seen a lot of success on applying machine learning. Quality control will be another area where you want to make sure that you are not producing scrap. And so you want to leverage here the data that your process or your machine are producing to detect early enough that there are some quality issues so that you can do something about it and make sure that the quality of your production is as you expected. Another area where we have seen a lot of success is process analysis, monitoring, and optimization, where, again, you want to use the experience from the past to analyze your current process to make sure that you are not, let's say, jeopardizing quality, for instance. And you want to use this information to parameterize your machines, your process in a way that you can optimally use the resources that you are using. So there we have seen also a lot of success on applying machine learning to reduce costs, to do more with what you have. And so energy management will be another area where you can apply machine learning to analyze your current energy consumptions, to reduce, let's say, energy waste, to make sure that you are not, again, wasting energy, which is very costly. And so coming back to the poll results, we saw that although we have very clear advantages on using machine learning on shop floor applications, there are not many companies using this technology. And the reason is, well, this is a very complex endeavor. You first have to make sure that you get access to the data, and CJ and Eric just explained how this could be done using some low-code or no-code approaches. But then once you have the data, you have to deal with it. You have to, using data science knowledge, you have to, train some algorithms so that you can use this information in the future to predict something that you can use to take actions, right? And this is a very complex process. And so our approach to that is to automatize the way or the process of creating a machine learning model using an AutoML approach, which is basically just the translation of the creation process, let's say, into an optimization problem that we can solve using the products that we provide. And so it's not only about creating the models, and for that you want subject matter experts to do that. That means someone who knows the data, someone who can tell you if a process or a machine is behaving as expected, or if there is let's say, a problem there. So you want to use this information, this knowledge, to guide the process of creating a machine learning model. But the data science process, you can abstract that away and enable the subject matter experts to do that using what they have, which is data and domain knowledge, let's say. And so that's our approach to machine learning.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. it's always about who's going to do this. Do we have the people? Do the people have the skills? ZJ, could you help me understand a little bit about who in a manufacturing company you see identifying the need for a low code, no code kind of thing, how they create the systems? Because I picture it as a kind of a drag and drop. There's graphics and I can pull them down into the right sequence, but those graphics weren't, born on the first day of Earth. So who does all this and then who uses it? Is who creates it the same people as who uses it? How's that work?
Yeah, so as a company, we sell up and down the chain. So it's from the shop floor all the way to the C-suite, CIO, COO. It's really across the organization. If we talk about open source and open source adoption specifically, it starts usually at the shop floor. Open source has the key advantage that it's free, and free, there's no price that beats it. So you get a sort of a shadow IT, and from there on out, the supervisor will try to understand what is the system and can we help you out to elevate this to a program that's approved within the manufacturing world. But then Carlos just spoke about data analysis and the amounts of data the use cases with AI need. Those to access that data, you also need low code. And then who creates these and how do you get started? So as there's already a giant no code and low code community, these connectors are already available. So if you don't know how Modbus works in the internals, it is simply just installing a Modbus node and you drag it up on the canvas and you wire it to, for example, MQTT. And you get started. And the key thing about low code versus high code is really you can just iterate. You can try and try again and try again. And every time it gets a little better, a little better. And because you deploy every second instead of every 10 hours or 12 hours, the path to success is just much, much quicker. So it's up and down the chain. We just spoke about Excel. So we're seeing our customers, some managers even ditching Excel in favor of one combined application where they all have the same.
You're speaking to my heart.
It's really happening. It's really happening. We're getting there. But it's still like paper and Excel are top competitors. So there's a long way to go for all of us in this room and for everyone out there. But it's not just the shop floor. It's not just replacing paper. There's huge potential for low codes and to unify all stakeholders.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that. Eric, the shop floor workers I know wouldn't see this as what they'd be good at or that it would really solve their problems or whatever. What are some of the misconceptions and barriers that the actual frontline workers face or believe they face about no-code tools, and how do you overcome those?
Yeah, great question. It's not a. Again, let's go back to the target persona. Like, what tools need to be given to what people, and then how do all these tools to work together to enable this next generation of smart connected systems here? And it's worth pointing out that it's implicitly stated, but we haven't addressed explicitly, that we are all on this call fans of and supporters of and believers in open architectures and interoperability. This morning when I walked into the office, I walked by a big screen with a big Node-RED thing flashing, so like in Tulip integrates with FlowFuse. If you Node-RED runs on all of our gateways, all of our edge devices globally. You can manage the Node-RED flows using FlowFuse, and that's like a beautiful integration. John, we had a collaboration with Sesame. John, when was that? Just like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, where John, Sesame says, "Hey, look, we're going to make it really easy to get your machines connected, and we're going to give you a free trial and show you how this can be done." And that integrates seamlessly with a bunch of Tulip applications on the Tulip library. You can pull in our free trial, and so everybody here is working with everybody, and we're all like on the same page. And I think that's a really important point as it relates to your question, because my target persona, maybe they're in IT and they have some responsibilities there. Maybe they're a frontline engineer. Maybe they're a frontline operator. The frontline worker wants an application that's going to help guide their work. The frontline engineer wants tools that are going to allow them to get away from the siloed Excels of the world and these nasty archaic interfaces with the ERP. They want the tool, but then that's going to be a different target persona than ZJ is thinking about. That's If we don't work together in a seamless way, that's highly problematic. If our systems are interoperable and we have this open architecture, that's actually a beautiful thing, and it allows us to kind of start to untie this Gordian knot of manufacturing IT and start to take give the tools to the people who need the tools to solve the problems, and then let all of this work together in a seamless way. So I think that's a really important point. I guess more directly to your question, if I'm thinking about the frontline worker, what skills do they need to have? Look, all of these people have smartphones. They do their banking, they call their cabs, via their smartphone. So there's a digital fluency that exists even among, what has historically referred to as more blue collar work. I kind of dispute that characterization, but I would say there's a digital fluency that is ubiquitous. I would say that, why is no code so important for your frontline engineer? Because being a software developer is hard and it requires specific training. Being a manufacturing engineer is hard and requires specific training. Very few people have deep training in both. But if you can lower the barrier to entry on the software development side and put it in the hands of that frontline engineer, then you're okay. And what's their starting place? PowerPoint. It's Microsoft. It's the Microsoft old suite. It's PowerPoint. It's Word. It's Excel. And so if you go into our platform, that's what it kind of looks and feels like. You have drag and drop UI. You have a relational database that's no code, looks and feels kind of like Excel meets Airtable. And then you have these no code integrations with the rest of your architecture. So those are the skill sets, and I think that there's a really important point here about open architectures and open ecosystems that we need to explicitly address.
So, Eric, do I need to have an understanding of Tulip, of FlowFuse, of all these different things? I mean, you made it sound like it's easy and it just works. But if I'm one of these workers and I need to do, whether I'm a shop floor worker or a manufacturing engineer, if I don't have a concept of what these things are and how they work together, I'm still behind a blank wall. So how do you overcome that?
Well, the people who are the people who are interacting with applications, I would say about 70% of them are frontline workers. So an app is developed, if somebody imports an app from our library. So let's say, I've got my machines connected via Node-RED, and I'm taking the serial and I'm parsing it. I'm piping it through the standards that Sesame is putting out there. This is all running well. I want to visualize it in Tulip. We go to the library. I import an application. This can all be done in less than an hour with 15 minutes of Googling for somebody with very basic software skills. Like everything I'm describing here is 10 years ago was very, very difficult. Today is very, very easy. I import that application and I'm starting to visualize data real time in my shop floor. The skill sets you need here are you just need to know how to use the internet to search for what you're looking for, and then you click the button and you can just import it, and then you literally drag the thing, move it over, and drag it to the thing you wanted to talk to. It's the barrier to entry here is really quite low now.
If I wait another 3 months, AI will do all that for me, and I just sit back and look.
We have there's some things we could talk about there as well on the application development side and data exploration side. But for that, you might have to go to a free trial of Tulip, or maybe we can allocate some more time at the end of the call.
Yeah. Okay.
Also,
go ahead.
Yeah, like ChatGPT is pretty good at building your Node-RED flows already. Like, just literally ask it to create your Node-RED flow, and you'd be amazed how quick and how well it does this. The barrier to entry, like Eric just said, it's shrinking every day, and not by just a little bit, but like leaps and bounds.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So we've talked a little bit about why look at this stuff, and then we've talked through some examples of what it's actually doing. And then we've talked through a little bit about the who recognizes the need, who can put it together, who's going to use the data. Let's move on to scalability, because no one on this call is going to work to the same company today that they were at yesterday. It's bigger, it's smaller, it's gone sideways, it's got new products, it's canceled products. The chat GPT's come out, my whole product line's been replaced. So there's a lot going on. So ZJ, could you talk to us a little bit about what it takes? Let's pretend that I've got this system in place to help me with low code, no code things. But now the business has changed dramatically. So the amount of data changes, the source of the information's changing. How easy is it to change these low-code applications as frequently as a lot of companies now need to?
Yeah, so there's actually two facets to this question, right? So first is scaling of the data and the volume, and the second one is the adaptability of the application itself. So let's start with the data. If you already have a platform in place like Tulip, like Flowfuse, this is mostly handed off to your vendor. So the orchestration is your IT, and Flowfuse will take care of that. And as a shop floor employee, you don't need to worry about how do I scale this? Can I create 5 more applications, or is 10 micro applications too much? This is just a vendor worry. Again, like just said before, the barrier to entry is lower and lower, and a lot of problems are abstracted away these days. So scaling one application to thousands of requests is not a big issue anymore. And then in terms of scaling the data, you also need to think about the data connections. We rely on the open source community and feed the open source community to keep them enthused and all these connections up to date. I still bet with my customers when I talk to them, if you can find 2 or 3 protocols you use today, which we don't support yet, you get a 10% discount. So far, no one has taken me up on it. And then to the second part, adaptability. Low code, like I said before, this is all an iterative process. Like today needs to be better than yesterday, and that's your only goal. Like just understand what's the biggest problem you want to fix today, and what's the step you can take today to improve that process. And if every day you reflect on the day and it's like, I made the problem I'm in a little smaller, or I made my world a little better, then you're on the right path. Then for an organization, obviously, they need to put the guardrails in place and help you to abstract away from your problem. But these are all secondary concerns, and are being pushed more and more towards the vendors. So it's mostly a vendor decision these days.
Well, and that's something I want to be clear on, because to me, low code, no code means I should be able to do this in my company. And yet the response to scalability is that's a vendor issue. So with all due respect to the vendors on this call, when do I get to get rid of vendors? Or will I ever?
Yeah.
As soon as the whole world moves to open source. That's one, but Eric, please jump in.
Yeah, maybe I can offer a perspective here. I have a different perspective than ZJ on this. I think what I would say, like, governance and control is critically important. You know, we're live in thousands of factories all over the world here, and many of these factories are, you know, CFR 21 Part 11 compliant environments that are audited by the FDA, that are making vaccines that we put into our body, right? These are like, governance is a very, very important topic. What I would say is that there's 2 parts to it. The first is there's a set of product requirements here, which is, do we have the tools within the platform to be able to enable appropriate governance? And, you know, one of the lines, like I mentioned, that's making a vaccine that's going to be audited by the FDA might be a different level of governance than somebody, you know, making, you know, I don't know, some like desktop widget or something like that. That's more of a novelty, right? But relatively inconsequential in the cost of quality. We're not talking lives. We're talking about a $3 part not working. My point is, like, it is on the vendor to make sure that those tools exist and that those approval workflows exist and that the structures exist. But then when you talk about how are these things actually employed and enforced, there's an organizational change component to this, where the company needs to say, this is, and decide for themselves, this is the appropriate level of governance. These are the appropriate approval workflows. Here's where we're going to set the left lane and the right lane, and let people develop and enable democratization and citizen development. Here's where we're going to lock that down and require central control. And so there, I don't want to understate the organizational piece of this. That's really quite important. Yeah, so it's like the product piece and the organization.
I love that, Eric. I would point to we talk about OT and IT in 2 very generic buckets, but I would point to the IT world and say what they've done well in their domain for the last several decades is open source and crowdsource, and yet there's still many vendors doing great things and innovating, and doing so in a trusted and secure and the sanctioned way. There is almost none of that in the OT world. And that's what that means is we're replicating and duplicating and doing proprietary things every stack, every single time, with the exception of a few of the companies that are represented on this call here today, and a handful of others. But broadly speaking, we are really, really proprietary in the OT world. We have a long ways to go before we're sort of we need to be concerned about sort of the end of the opportunity for open source and crowdsourcing. We need to figure out how to get started and how we can actually work on commoditizing the things that are necessary to commoditize, and focus on the value creation piece, not the bottom 80% of the stack, which happens to be so proprietary every time. We have many sort of large manufacturing organizations that we work with, and they have their sort of sanctioned manufacturing IT stack, but every single one of them, by a factor of about 30, has shadow IT systems all over the shop floor that are not sanctioned, that are not secured, that don't have an official home on their network, that are huge risks for the entire organization, both from perspective of cybersecurity, but also making product. And that sort of shadow IT is the piece that I think this whole conversation addresses: a structured, sanctioned, secure way of helping manufacturing organizations at scale solve problems without these big, monolithic, heavy, purpose-built things that further propagate the mess of the third industrial revolution. And so we have great opportunity for vendors to innovate, but what every manufacturing company in this country and in the world ought to do is insist on no longer engaging with vendors that propagate these stovepipe architectures and data silos. That's the legacy of the past. Let's look to the future.
So, John,
one aspect. Oh, sorry.
That's okay, Carlos. Go ahead.
Just one aspect I would like to mention. So, John mentioned also at the beginning that interoperability and standardization are also key to enable end users, let's say, to get rid of vendors, right? So they want to use realized applications. They want to focus on production. And again, I think a vehicle to achieve this is to have standardization, definitely. But it's also a dilemma, because the standardization means you have to come together, a bunch of vendors have to come together, they have to agree on this standard, and it takes time. So if you want to achieve that, you need this time, and you want to actually do something with the technology. So it's a little bit of a dilemma, let's say. In the area of machine learning, standardization means for me using the standard formats, and there are standard formats which we use to describe machine learning models. And if you do that, you enable a variety of different actors, people to use machine learning without having to worry about the vendor, right? That's also a very important topic.
Thanks, Carlos. For all of you, am I going to need in IT, I have a structure that's like 75 levels deep. You can tell I've been burnt. But anyway, to control and manage and do all that stuff, am I going to end up on the operations technology side with an organizational structure to make sure that these low-code, no-code tools and the MQTT and all that stuff is organized and structured and managed? I was kind of hoping that it'd be every man for himself in some way, so I can get what I need.
I want to challenge the paradigm here. We're approaching this as a binary. You either need the structure or you don't need the structure. I would say the reality and the answer is much more nuanced, which is there are applications. Let's think about the application that's going to guide the SOPs for how you produce the vaccine that's going to be injected into somebody's arm. Guess what? You need the structure and you need the approval. Like, we should not compromise at all, and it is appropriate to have that level of structure there. Then let's think about a different process where, the first example I gave, where, hey, I've got this quality defect, shoes are being made, and if I wait a whole week to fix this problem, I'm going to make thousands of bad shoes, and I'm going to have to rework every single one of them. You don't need the structure there. When you see the problem, you can immediately take action, and you can, see the signal. You can address that programmatically by incorporating inline quality inspections via the application that's live there. You can make that change in less than an hour, and in doing so, create massive efficiencies. My point here is that Some of these problems necessitate and are appropriate to have the kind of 75 levels of approvals structure that you mentioned. Many of these are not, and that's like, I would say, free for all citizen development. Let's chase efficiencies. So it's not an either or. It's a what problem are we solving, and what's the appropriate level of governance for that particular problem. And then now that's a organizational question, and deciding the left and right lane. The vendor here has no opinion. We can share what others are doing, but we're not the ones responsible for making this product. They are. For us, from a product perspective, we just need to make sure that we can enable both and everything in between.
Okay, thanks. One of the audience questions is about security. And so I'd like us to address for at least just a minute. Node-RED is open source. And we've all probably read in the news recently where some Microsoft guy was sitting at home and happened to be bored and happened to discover some huge problem that had been embedded in some part of software that I don't understand at all. But had he not found that and notified people, we would have or could have had a huge security problem with virtually every product. So is open source more susceptible to security problems or not? Should we look at housing these things on site versus in the cloud? What are some of the security aspects?
Yeah, so open source is not necessarily riskier. Actually, I'd like to argue the opposite. So most testing is done as a black box. So you throw stuff at it and you see what comes out, and therefore you try to reverse engineer, what happens in a black box, and so you find issues. Where if the code is public, you can do static analysis and all that kind of stuff to, on a code level, do a red flag review and figure out, is this an actual security issue or is this proper use of certain APIs? But that's just on a technical level. On an organizational level, you do need someone to be on the hook, basically, for certain subsystems. And this is based on tooling. Like, how do you roll out security fixes for open source, but also for other products, right? Like, who do you call? Actually, quite the opposite. Who calls you when something hits the fan, so to speak? Then there's the legal side of things, the liability and indemnification. Again, this is an organizational and vendor issue, which together you'll figure out. The biggest thing for Node-RED specifically, as you mentioned it, is standing on the shoulder of giants. So the OpenJS Foundation is super helpful for everything in the Node.js space, and so Node-RED as well, which its parent, the Linux Foundation, is super helpful as well. And therefore, we're well equipped to handle exploits like XZ that you just referenced. XZ, by the way, open source. And again, it was spotted quite fast because it is open source. And then for the cloud versus on-site, this is always going to depend on the use case. There's no one answer that fits all. There's so much data on the edge that needs to be real time. Security and safety systems will never go to the cloud and back because your safety system will just be invalidated as soon as your connection is severed for some reason. So you always have logic on the edge to do safety, but also for everything real time. If you need sub-second latency, is generally much better to be on the edge than to the cloud. However, big analysis or application level where 500 milliseconds or a second is just kind of irrelevant, we see as a company a lot of shift to the cloud because it alleviates the burden of maintaining and operations.
Thank you.
Can I point out that he's saying, I think we need to distinguish on edge from on-prem as well.
Yeah.
And these are not like security questions. These are constraints of the speed of light. How long does it take an electron to go to Northern Virginia and back down to Florida? And yeah, so I think that's an important point. And
also, as soon as you trust the network, there's so many hops without you controlling them. You should just not put your safety systems or any other systems which need sub-second latency in the hands of an unknown quantity. It's just not safe to do. And then keep it on-prem or on the edge as close as possible to where you need the data to be handled.
Maybe
There's a question here on the audience, from the audience about India specifically. And the question states that the Indian customers are very price sensitive. I don't know any country where they're not. But do you guys have any specific advice related to what's going on in India with these kinds of questions? Surarav, and if I butchered your names, I'm sure I butchered that one, asked how can it provide benefits to specifically to the Indian market where customers are price sensitive? I have the sense that nothing you've said wouldn't apply to the Indian market, other than if there's an infrastructure weakness, and we've got West Virginia, so we've got infrastructure weaknesses as well. Guys, what do you say?
Okay, I'm more than happy to jump in then. So what you're basically saying is like if the value provided doesn't match up with the cost price, then we're not going to buy it. This is exactly the same for any customer, like you started this discussion with, Rebecca. So as a vendor, if any customer, doesn't matter what the geography is price conscious, then the company has done a poor job in understanding how to communicate the value or there's just not a problem and value fit, and it's just not a match made in heaven, and it's not a great fit. In terms of low code, I truly believe that everyone benefits within the manufacturing space if they can understand where the data is coming from, what it means, what the gotchas are of these data, like to truly understand the meaning of the data, and that would democratize the whole shop floor.
I would just add briefly that in those communities that maybe don't have a long history of investing in manufacturing systems of any sort, which includes a lot of small, medium manufacturers. It includes emerging markets and low-cost markets. There's an opportunity. The significant headwinds come from the sort of technical debt that we've created for ourselves over the past 3 decades. And where we don't have that technical debt weighing us down, we have opportunities to leverage some of these new capabilities in ways that are more standards-based and where we can drive interoperability as a requirement without that sort of incumbent set of systems or legacy architectures that will hold us up. So I would just say from an optimist standpoint, at least at a macro level, small, medium manufacturers and kind of emerging markets have huge opportunities to architect strategies and digitization approaches and architectures without the technical debt weighing them down and holding them back.
Okay. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate those responses. Even I could understand them, so that's good. We have talked about the why and what have people done successfully and who does all this kind of thing. And we've briefly approached security. So I hope we've hit the major angles on all this. We were able to work through a couple of audience questions. It's time for us to begin to wrap up. So this was kind of information through a fire hose for me and probably for others. So I'd really appreciate it if each one of you would just take a minute or two to say what is the single most important point you want the audience to take away from this conversation. If they only remember one thing, what should it be?
Mm-hmm.
Carlos, do you want to go first?
Yes, of course, I can do that. So I think we have discussed about low code and how it works, the principle behind it, and the single takeaway message I would like to provide is, well, this could enable you and your current teams to do more with what you already have. So low code means you have access to a technology which you didn't have before, and that means your current staff can do a lot more, achieve more with what you already have.
Thank you. Thank you. John, what's the one thing you want them to take away? And we talked about you being geographically in the United States more than any place else, but I know that you're also getting involved with some other countries. So what's the one thing you want everybody to take away?
So I think the manufacturing community ought to insist on, for the next use case that they consider investing in, and every future use case, which fundamentally ought to demand a more cohesive strategy, digitalization or smart manufacturing strategy. But the notion that we no longer find data silos and stovepipe architectures acceptable, that we enable the kinds of low-code, no-code solutions based on that sort of interoperability as a standard requirement, will dramatically improve the way we think about creating worker value and allowing the frontline workers to become part of the value creation in our manufacturing operations. Our cost of labor here in the U.S. and in most first world economies is too high to ignore the thinking, the innovation, the sort of value add that the frontline worker can provide. We just have not been able to put the tools based on our sort of the status of where we are on our thinking and capabilities and architectures on the plant floor. We have just not been able to put the tools in front of them to engage them. We now do. We're beginning to, and we ought to be working on how can we enable the value creation of every frontline worker in our operation.
Thank you. Eric, sorry, but you've only got about 30 seconds to tell us.
I'll be fast.
What do you think
fast.
is the most important takeaway?
Yeah. So look, I think the most important thing is that to understand that the world has changed and that technology has changed the way we can solve these problems. What 10 years ago was the only way to go about it, and I'm thinking like incumbent MES, monolithic, top-down, painful implementations of these shop floor production systems. What 10 years ago was the only way to do it is today, at best, the suboptimal and most inefficient and painful way to do it. And in another few years is going to be irrelevant. And so people need to be very forward leaning. They need to keep up with technology. They need to understand the tools that are becoming available and how these tools apply to their specific operations.
Thank you. Thank you. And ZJ, I want to thank you and FlowFuse for sponsoring this panel conversation. And I want to hear your last comment.
Yeah, so it's basically a summary of what the panel already discussed. But low code enables you to remove these silos and empower the shop floor to engage and start with innovation in your organization. And whether that's in India or the US, like we need to unlock the next step of effectivity in the factory, and low code is well positioned to do that.
Thank you guys very, very much for all your information. I think it's been great. And now it's time to move on to the next session, led by my good friend, Hamish McKenzie, and that is Beyond Silos, Streamlining Data Flow with a Unified Namespace.